Hey folks, this is Takota Coen here, and before we jump into the podcast with Mark Shepard, I wanted to let you know about an event that we've got coming up that I'm really excited about. So as you may know, my colleagues Rob and Michelle Avis and I have been writing a book for the last couple of years, and that book is about to be released towards the end of April. And to help us kind of celebrate the launch of this book, we're also organizing an online summit with permaculture experts from all around the world. So we've got folks like Jeff Lawton, Peter Bain, Starhawk, Ben Falk, Richard Perkins, Morag Gamble, Mark Shepard, Stefan Sobkowiak, Rosemary Morrow. We're even having a live concert on the first night with the Formidable Vegetable Sound System. And we've also got Jack Spirko. And many others. And so basically the idea is to help us kind of launch our book, Building a Permaculture Property. Thought, wouldn't it be awesome if we got kind of all these amazing people from all around the world to help share their kind of case studies about their successes and their failures as they built their permaculture properties. So essentially we've got 3 days of April 23rd, 24th, 25th, all day long, back to back to back, where we're going to be hearing from all these amazing presenters about how they built their permaculture properties. There's going to be live Q&A. We've got amazing door prizes from some of our incredible sponsors. The main one being New Society Publishers, which was the folks that we've been working with on our new book. And so if you're at all interested in checking out this event, or in getting a copy of our new book, you can head over to mypermacultureproperty.com. And you can find out more information about the event. You can also register to receive updates about the schedule and when the presenters are going to be joining us to share their stories. Now, if you're hearing this after the fact, don't worry, because this whole thing is being recorded and we're actually putting together an amazing book bundle that's going to include basically our book, as well as lifetime access to all of these recordings and a bunch of other stuff. So regardless of whether you're listening to this before April 23rd, 24th, and 25th, 2021, or afterwards, if you're at all interested in this kind of stuff, be sure to head over to mypermacultureproperty.com and check out the details for this event. Now, without any further ado, we're going to jump into the podcast with Mark Shepard. I do just want to give you guys a heads up. There were some audio issues with this particular podcast. I don't know what happened. It seems like there was something on the recording side where the volume of our voices was going up and down. So I did my best to try to even that out and stop any really loud stuff or really quiet stuff. But I do apologize if I blow out anybody's eardrums. So, but this was one of my favorite conversations I've had on the podcast thus far. So, you might have to adjust the volume a couple times, but it's going to be absolutely worth it. So I hope you enjoy the conversation that Mark and I had, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye. Hi, folks. This is Takota Coen here, and we're back for another episode of the Building a Permaculture Property podcast. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have one of my favorite guys in permaculture on the show here, as Mark Shepard. And I first got introduced to Mark Shepard actually kind of serendipitously. It was right after I'd taken my first permaculture design course. I remember I was totally disenchanted with organic agriculture. My parents had been doing it for 30 years. We had been slowly, basically running out of money in topsoil using that particular system. And so I knew I wanted to come back to the farm, but organic wasn't working. And so I was typing in, alternative agricultural solutions. Permaculture came up. Something clicked. It made absolute sense. I just went online, found like the first permaculture course that was advertised. It was in BC at some kind of a hippie commune out in the middle of British Columbia. I went there for 2 weeks. I was one of two people in the course. And it was a very small course. I don't know how I didn't find anything better, but so I was there for 2 weeks. And there was a vegan place. We ate basically rice and beans for 2 weeks. The teacher she was, really, really great lady. All the people were fantastic, really nice people. But having grown up on a farm and reading some of the early stuff about permaculture, I thought this is permanent agriculture. And after spending 2 weeks at this, basically gardening on steroids type little tips and tricks thing, I was totally disenfranchised about what permaculture was and whether it was going to actually help our farm. And I came home and I was like going through kind of a depression. I got like sick. Had a flu, and I was literally like bedridden for 2 or 3 days, just YouTube binging. And I watched I think it was your Permaculture Voices, one of the first videos you did, and like somebody had just, I don't know if it was done against your will or not, but they just took your slides and there was no picture of you. I didn't even know what you looked like. It was just voiceover on top of slides.
Oh, that was an Acres. That was an Acres.
That was Acres. Okay. Yeah. So I watched that and it changed my life. Like, wow. Hands down, that's what got me. Is like, this is what I knew permaculture could be. And here was this guy, in a very similar climate to me. Again, it wasn't somebody from Australia or growing bananas or, mangoes or whatever. So you were kind of local to our area. You were, large scale. You had, over 100 acres. And I watched your presentation like 3 or 4 times in a row. I made everybody around me watch it. And that's what got me back into permaculture. And then I started diving deep into, what Bill had originally said and watching his original stuff. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that everybody already knows, who's on this podcast already knows who you are. So I don't want to waste time with that because you're a busy guy. But for folks, I guess, for quickly,
know who I am. Who cares?
Everybody. So for folks who don't, just like the Coles notes, Mark Sheppard, he's a farmer, permaculture farmer, homesteader. He's the author of several books. The first, I believe, was Restoration Agriculture, which was basically real world permaculture for farmers, which is exactly what the world needs. And your latest book is Water for Any Farm, which I hopefully will talk mostly about that because I know you've done a lot of other podcasts and stuff about your first book there. But kind of just to jump into it with you right now, I'd like to get your take on why is it that permaculture seems to have been hijacked from permanent agriculture to gardening on steroids?
I think in part was because the original adopters, and even Bill Mollison is not immune from some of this, is their worldview and where they actually lived at the time. The people who got excited about this were ripe for some kind of change. And if you know anything about a farmer, you're working on a shoestring budget. You're not really thinking we're going to change absolutely everything all at once. That's not your first thought. But there are other people in suburban situations that they see all of the writings on all the different walls and they're ready for change. So the first adopters were what I call the original hippie class, like the 60s, early 70s, 1960s, 1970s kind of crowd, and they gave it their flavor. And this is the part that Bill Mollison was even a subject to. I was going to say a victim, but subject to was on the economics side of thing. That whole hippie generation, and I grew up like as a 7 to 10-year-old kid during that whole era when that was all going on. That capitalism was actually horrible evil foisted upon the universe, and had to be just thrown out, absolutely everything thrown out, a new system to replace it. So on the whole economics thing, even Bill Mollison missed the boat. He missed his own advice in that we're supposed to observe nature, natural systems, observe the system conditions. What are they? Now design a system that captures whatever the energy resource is, spreads it or moves it to where we want it, focus it in a particular place, and create an abundant, resilient, anti-fragile, perennial system that survives that, whatever the flaws might be in the system. So instead of following that protocol himself, he's like, throw it all baby out with the bathwater. Instead of saying, hey, wait, here are some ways, because we all exist within the world economy the way it is right now, we have to figure out how to use these tools that are at our disposal to create systems that will outlast that.
Yeah.
And if we use the current economic system to set up systems that are ecologically resilient and regenerate through time, we can, if the economic system goes sideways on us at any point in time, the ecological system does not. And that's, I think, where capitalism comes from in the first place. You plant a tree, the sun shines, it rains, you got some mineralization going on in the soil, the tree grows and it adds a net increment to itself every single year. Now, you're not necessarily in the same biome where I kind of got all of my educational training, but in the humid eastern part of the continent, if you plant a field full of white pine, eastern white pine, for example, on an average site, you'll gain about 7% per year. This plant gets that much bigger every single year. That's natural capitalism based on the sun, the wind, the rain, the soil as it is on the site, even if it's not any soil. And that system will survive whatever that place can throw at it. It can survive fire, it can survive drought, it can survive ice storm, it can survive mastodons knocking it over, bison trampling all over everything, and it sprouts back and continues. That is a regenerative system. It's naturally derived. And if we individually change our economics so that we can fit within that system, now we're just like tweaking a system. It's going in the direction that it wants to go in. And we're benefiting from some of this natural surplus yield that's produced by our site. That makes sense?
Totally. So, I mean, just to clarify your thoughts here is the people that kind of first grabbed onto Bill's, genius, which was, biomimicry essentially. And there at that time, there was a lot of, concerns about some of the symptoms of what people assumed was capitalism. And a lot of those people tended to be city folks, and it kind of just got veered off in that direction. And so I didn't expect you to break into capitalism right away, but are you a fellow Ayn Rand? Have you followed any of her stuff, or Ayn Rand?
Let's not go into that because I'm going to call. Actually, by my thinking, my approach, and my philosophy, it's all about ecology and ecological systems.
Yes.
Everything else is a subset of that.
Yes.
And all these different economists and politicians from this side to that side, doesn't matter who you are, where you're at, you're all a subset of the ecology of this planet. Yeah. And no one of them has a whole picture of how the whole thing works. And so all of them have some of the truth and none of them have all the truth. That's my perspective on that. Yeah. And that's a way also for me to stay out of hot water with people, because there are some people that are totally this, they're totally that. And when I'm there, I have to speak their language to help them in their direction to come into line with ecological realities. But back to the first adopters thing, if you can also imagine yourself in a suburban environment, you are totally captured within a world that's been pixelated. And the whole Western scientific reductionist worldview is that there's this one thing that solves everything. And then what is this one thing? And plus you're looking around, you got a 1/4 acre lot. What can you do? You plant a couple of seeds in a bucket. That's where you start. Well, then, because you're surrounded by nothing but the man-made world, these are what your inspirations are. And these really cool little ideas like the 16 brick rocket stove and the mud oven and, growing pipes and strawberries and lettuce in the pipes. It's like, those are all little trinkets. They're sparkly little things that the crow keeps going after. That's not the big picture. Yeah. So permaculture got colored by the first adopters, their economic worldview, and their interpretation of Bill Mollison's line to make small and incremental changes instead of big ones. Yes. And they took that as a dictate saying that permaculture has to be small. It's like, no, you go reread it again. Yeah. Small incremental changes. And here's a small incremental change I would like to do. On every single acre of land in the corn and soybean belt of the United States of America, one small change I would like to make is to start every one of those acres on the path towards returning to the oak savanna biome that it was before Europeans came in and plowed it all up. It's one small change, but it covers hundreds of millions of acres.
Yes.
That is makes small incremental changes. But because they saw small, they figured everything's got to be small. I live in a small place. It's got to be small. It's permaculture small. It's all small. And so anybody who tries to apply small thinking, and you grow a fair amount of produce, is that true? Or no?
For ourselves, our farming business is based around proteins.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. So the vegetable grower, I'll use that word, a grower, and a person who sells their vegetables, whether they're CSA, market gardener, or wholesale, if you wake up in the morning and you grab a hoe or some kind of hand tool, you are a gardener.
Yeah.
And so what happened is the permaculturists living in little suburban landscapes reached for a hoe in the morning or a rake. They're gardeners, so their interpretation of permaculture was gardening. So it's now landscape gardening on steroids. But if you try to do like me, at one point in time, I was doing 12 acres of produce.
Yeah.
Well, where are all my volunteers? Where's my work day? Where are my interns? Where are all my paid help and all that kind of stuff? No, it's just me. It's pretty easy because my first tool wasn't a hoe. My first tool is get that tractor started, which didn't always cooperate with me, but because once you get that scale, now things are easy. So many market gardeners I go to help and do a consultation with, they're looking at this 1 acre of ground like, oh, how do you keep up with it? It's like, get a tool that actually handles an acre. I get an acre done before noon. What's your problem?
Yeah.
Oh, you're just bragging, you arrogant snot. It's like, no. I'm just using a different tool.
It's funny you say that, because I remember like when I was first got into permaculture, and I was so excited about, after I got through my depression and kind of found your stuff and went back to read Bill's original stuff and realized that his whole intention was, as you said, to start small, around your house, make small mistakes, learn there, but then to scale it up and eventually to transform agriculture into something that was perennial and permanent. And so I was just like, oh man, this is amazing. And I would share, videos and stuff on, various social media about some of the stuff that we were doing, because I was, out in the middle of the boonies and, basically the industrial agricultural wasteland. There was nobody, no community. And I would just get absolute vitriol and like slam about like, oh, you have tractors, you're not doing permaculture. You're using a bulldozer. That's not permaculture. And like just vicious attacks. And it's like, there's literally a chapter in the book, the Permaculture Designer's Manual, called, Earthworks. Yep. And it's all about, but it's really interesting how, but I like your take on that, is that people who Bill wanted to start small and make incremental changes, but people kind of got stuck there because it's easy, and then mixed in with all the other stuff in the cities and the economic pressures on farmers and how difficult it is for them to make any kind of change, no matter how small, because they're literally stuck on these debt cycles and everything else.
And what relates to all of that too, this start small and get bigger, that goes back to Bill Mollison and his situation, is he also wasn't a farmer by trade, Yeah. And so things that he wrote about, he wasn't able to verify through experience before the Permaculture Designer's Manual came out. And the one that you just explained was perfect. We'll learn about all these little things by doing small changes around your homestead. And then Mollison called it rolling permaculture. You do this plot first, and you do that one, then that one, then that one, then that one, and pretty soon you got the whole thing covered. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and it seems easy to do. But I'm gonna use my fingers if I can, because the video will show up, right?
Yeah.
So if you got, this is 50 hectare, okay, 10 each. If we start with this, well, it's even smaller than that. Let's say we start with this, right? This year we go out, we design the system, we plant the system, we maintain the system. And the early 3 years of getting a perennial system in place are the most critical. You've got to be there to keep things alive when they need to be alive. Then once they're there, they're settled in, they're growing, they'll be okay.
Yeah.
So here, we've got all our regular farming that's taking place over here. And now we take time out and we make an investment that seems small, it seems affordable, it seems doable. So now we're planting, maintaining, any irrigating, weed control, whatever. Well, now year 2, we got to do planting and maintaining and maintaining. Now we go planting, maintaining, then planting, maintaining, planting, maintaining. Now we're 5 years in, and these finally start to produce. Yeah. So we've kind of pushed out all of our other agriculture. We've made our cash flow, get smaller. And now we go to harvest a yield off of this, and it's not worth the effort to go do it. You go pick a 100-foot row of hazelnuts and you get 2 cups worth of nuts. Good for you. What you want to do is you do the whole damn thing all at once. Now, but that's big. It's like, no, it's not. Because the first thing we did is we observed what are the natural plant community types of this place, the stuff that's grown in the ditch all by itself. Let's imitate that, design our system, set it up in rows. Horrors, rows. Well, the rows now are going to help steer the water where we want the water. This is part of the design. And now we got 3 years of maintenance. Yeah. We're crazy ass maintenance, and we're going to take care of that. And then when our yields kick in by year 5, I'm just picking a number arbitrarily, all of a sudden it's worth the effort. Now that is how you make that transition across. And the agroforestry techniques of alley cropping, planting rows of trees on side of currently existing cash flow fields, whether you're doing livestock or produce or corn and beans, canola. That's a great way to do it, because while taking care of your canola, you're taking care of your trees. While taking care of your cattle, you're taking care of your trees. Yeah, so that's another issue that happened early on, just because Mollison didn't know. He wasn't a farmer.
Totally. And although, I don't know if he wrote this after he wrote the designer's manual, but there's another great blog that he wrote, or I guess it wouldn't be a blog, an article called it's like 4 years to abundance or something, or the 4 stages of abundance. And that's essentially what he recommended, is like you start out doing, observing and doing like variety trials on a small scale. And then you, by kind of year 2 or 3, you figure out which ones are going to work. And then on year, I think it's year 3, you basically scale up and you plant it all out, because you've made mistakes in the small scale, and you've had those observations, and then you scale up. And that's essentially I did it kind of backwards, because I went too big. I went too big too fast, and also I was basing a lot of my observations on what other people were doing, not what I was doing. I was taking people's prescriptions and trying to put those on my farm, and turns out there's a lot of side effects when you follow somebody else's prescription. Right. And but eventually, after kind of 5 years, that's when I started to figure shit out. And yeah, we've got the whole farm is designed out with this kind of alley cropping system, and yeah, and like you said, now it's worthwhile to go out and pick those fruit or those apples. Yeah.
And that's actually, I mentioned it in the banter before we started recording too. What I appreciate most about reading your book and seeing your work is the fact that you've actually lived through this process. Mm-hmm. You actually do this on a day-to-day basis, and you're not afraid to discuss the things that you did that didn't really work all that well, which does take a little bit of personal courage, because you have to be vulnerable. And if you're not comfortable with who you are and what you're currently doing, that vulnerability can be scary for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's a vicious cycle, because like if people don't talk about their failures, then the people who are trying to get into it think, oh, well, like if you make a failure, or something doesn't work, oh, I must have done something wrong. Versus if we all kind of start sharing the big, like I've made $20,000 mistakes, right, easily in like a single day.
How about I've made $20,000 investments that never really paid themselves back.
That's right. Well, the way that I look at it is most people spend about $40,000 to go to university. I didn't go to university, and so that was my school of hard knocks tuition.
Oh, that's all right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Whereas I have probably $100,000 worth of machines that I invented in order to do post-harvest handling on various different things.
Yeah.
That what I learned by making that investment caused me to make the next investment that made the first one obsolete. So
Yeah.
I've got a shed full of obsolete equipment that, you know, I helped to make obsolete. It's like, it would have been nice if someone else was doing this and made all those investments for me, but had to learn what I had to learn.
Totally. Okay, so now that we've kind of given both our critiques of of permaculture, and you know, it's a fantastic system. And actually, this is something that we talked about before we started recording, is just dogma. Like, at the end of the day, like, this is, I think, the biggest problem in every, you know, field I've studied in, is just you know, the unwillingness to observe and interact, and to get feedback for when you're doing something that it doesn't make sense. And like, gardening is absolutely essential for you know, the world that we need to move towards, but that's that's not everything.
Well,
And
and I'm still waiting for anyone, somebody, somewhere, anywhere, show me anybody, anyone, or any family that can grow all of their own food on a suburban lot. Just show me that person, because until that happens, there is no proof of concept.
No.
So the proof of concept is you can grow a tremendous amount of things, and why not, in that situation, in the urban situation, let's grow the supercharged, hyper mineralized vitamins and minerals and roughage that is so easy to get in a small scale intensive system like that. And let's get the carbohydrates, proteins, and oils from perennial systems like ours.
Yeah.
And that's at scale. That's called a farm.
Yeah. And
necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was your you know, that was your kind of core thesis of restoration agriculture, is that, you know, in order for us to continue civilization, we need to have a regenerative way of producing the, you know, the carbohydrates, fats, and oils, and proteins that we need to live, because we can't just live on vegetables. So yeah, that I couldn't agree more. So I'd like to transition now into your newest book, Water for Any Farm, and start to talk about that, because I've read both your books, and you know, the first one was great. It was but it was more of a you know, an introductory level. Like, you know, any consumer could pick that book up and they could get it. Right. But this Water for Any Farm, and from what I understand, your plan is to write a series of very detail-oriented kind of manuals, technical manuals on specific aspects of how do you actually do this restoration agriculture that's geared towards, you know, farmers. And the first one being water. So I guess
I'll interrupt here.
Okay.
That you got that correct. Is that restoration agriculture is the big overview. This is permaculture design. We're going from the pattern down to the details.
Yeah.
Well, within restoration agriculture, there's a certain order of operations, the things that are more important to get done first.
Yes.
So water was the first one. So restoration agriculture as a whole actually is 6 or more other mini books that fit within it. And as you've read, it's not mini. Yeah. So the water book that you got originally came out to be twice as big as that. And the publisher kind of at the time said, well, you know what? There's a lot of material in here that if we included it in this book, the people who aren't technically minded will just get turned off and put it down. And it'll be no different than Yeoman's book. So let's have the narrative and the pictures in one book and have the technical data and information in the next. So the third one in waiting is the engineering and technical manual that hasn't been published yet, but it's supposed to be, as of December, it was supposed to be published, but you know what happened this past year.
Yeah. Everything got pushed back.
So we got that correct as far as how it's laid out. Anybody can pick up restoration agriculture. You really have to be serious about wanting to manage the rainfall or irrigation that comes to your property in order to get into a Water for Any Farm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, first off, I guess with this book, Water for Any Farm, we kind of already answered this, but I'll kind of ask a leading question because I think I know where you're going to go with it. Because there's another book called Water for Every Farm, and so why did you write this book if there's already a book called Water for Every Farm that's very similar to yours, Mark?
Water for Every Farm, Australian PA yeomans. And he was in Australia at the time. He's like a mining engineer, so he knew equipment, he knew how water moves and stuff like that. And he described a very simple methodology and a very simple pattern that works in Australia. And I'm not going to get too far into the weeds as to what that pattern is, but one of the things with yeomans is that he was developing this simple, rote system. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and everything's fine. He was doing it on the topographically simplest continent on the planet. And it doesn't mean people are simpletons or anything like that. It's not a denigration. It's an observable phenomena. If you've got a stream, I'm going to use my fingers here, running down this way, that's the first water that starts to flow, whether it's seasonal or perennial. That's a first order stream.
Yeah.
If you got two first order streams that come together, this is a second order stream. If you have another first order stream that joins this is still a second order stream. But if you have two second order streams that come together, the one that runs down the middle is a third order stream. Well, Australia is the topographically simplest continent. It has no river system that is more complex than a third order stream. So the very simple pattern, the very simple formula that yeomans devised in Australia, if you take it out here to where I live, I'm on the Mississippi River drainage, which happens to be the hydrologically most complex river system on the planet. It's not the biggest by any stretch of the imagination, but it's either a 10th or 11th order stream where I stand right here. And this is nuts. I mean, so what the simple formula in water for Yeoman's book, for in Yeoman's book, this simple pattern is like 1 + 2 = 3. 1 + 2 = 3 everywhere around the world, correct. But 1 + 2 = 3 does not describe my landform. You can't do it. 1 + 2 = 3. That's great, but it doesn't work here. We need more advanced calculus in order to do this. That said, there still is a simple pattern and a simple pathway that you can go through. And by going through a simple pattern and take an adaptive strategy, all of a sudden the complexity goes off the chart, but it's still simple. All we have to work with when we're moving water is we either make a level ditch or a level hole in the ground. And what does the water level do? It stays level, right? But if we lower one side of it, where does the water go? That way. If we lower the other side, where does water go? That way. So already we just introduced 3 levels of complexity. Well, this computer that we're talking over only works on 2, on or off. So if you got on or off, and we can talk on computers like this, what if we have 3? Oh my gosh, it just goes off the charts. The complexity you can come up with, but it's simple. Level, tilted this way, tilted that way. Then you start combining them. And you can design and you can move water amazing ways, and you can store water in amazing places that people don't even think of.
Absolutely. And so then there's one kind of quote I want to read from your book, and I listened to your book on audio or audible, because
the water book?
Pardon?
The water book?
Yeah. Well, both actually.
Okay, because with the water book, there's so many diagrams in it. You really should get the hardcover because you can see the pictures.
Definitely, and I'm planning on. But even with I know I saw you we were at a conference. Was it a month ago or something together, and I heard you give your presentation, and you did mention that, and that's where I first heard about your book. But I figured, well, I'll go and get the audiobook first. I couldn't believe how much I got out of it, even without the drawings, just based on the little bit of background information that I know about P.A. Yeoman's keyline system. But for sure, it will be helpful. But the most I think the biggest quote from the book, and I don't know if this is your quote or P.A. Yeoman's. This is the problem with audiobooks, is it's hard to tell when somebody's quoting or not. But it was the quote is this. So that you're talking about the master line within the system, and so you define it as like it's a sweet spot in the landscape where there's a line on every property from which that property's relationship to water can be optimized.
Right.
And
that's a paraphrase of what he said.
Yeah. And so when I heard that one line, I was like, that's it. That's all key. It was like the simplest definition of key line I'd ever heard. Is like there's a line on every property from which that property's relationship to water can be optimized. And the reason why
that line
go ahead.
might not be a key line according to Yeoman's definition.
Exactly, and that was the critical point, because I know about all the key lines and how to find the inflection points in the landscape, but the problem is, if I were to design my farm based on Yeoman's system, it wouldn't work, or like it would not be optimized.
Right.
Because most of my water comes through a valley that's not on my farm, and so I want to pick that up and take it sideways, based on my own goals and context. But the way that you paraphrased Yeoman's there was just like, that's exactly what it is. That was the core principle, and that will work everywhere. And the reason why picking one line is really important is because, all of our equipment and stuff works in a rectilinear format, meaning like we like to go side by side at set widths. And if you pick one line, or the fewer lines, the better. Because on my farm, I have 3 different lines, 3 different swales that I use, and so there is a bit of kind of odd stuff in the middle, but based on my own context, I've made that decision that that's the best way to optimize water on my property. But I'll read it again here, because it's like the sweet spot or the master line or the key line is there's a line on every property from which that property's relationship to water can be optimized, and yeah, that really did it for me.
And leave the word key line out of that, because it might not be the key line.
Yes.
If you look at my hand here, you'll see that this is a main ridge. These are hills and saddles. This is a primary ridge, a primary valley. 2 primary valleys come together, and there's a main valley. Well, in key line design, you find a key point.
Yeah.
You make a contour line from that key point. That's a key line.
Yes.
Well, it just so happens that on my hand, if I had a key line here, make everything go parallel down in the valleys, have all your equipment passes parallel up on the ridges, the water will migrate from high in the valleys to low on the ridges. That works great. And the different ponds are linked through the landscape. This can gravity feed that, and so on. However, not all land is shaped that simply, because you'll have extra little hills going down the ridge. You'll have extra divots. There's valleys that I think it was like 6 different key points in the valley that all met the definition of key line and key point. It's like, let's just leave that out of the conversation for a bit.
Yeah.
Let's manage the water on our farms using channels and mounds. USDA calls it terraces, swales and berms and key line talk. I don't care what you call it. You can make a channel. You don't need a mound. Then you call it a canal or a ditch. We're going to move water where we want to move it, and it's relatively simple to keep it safe, and then we store it where it is most convenient, and it accomplishes our goals and our objectives, and it's adjustable. And if we don't like it what it's doing today, we adjust the bottom of our channel to move the water in a different location 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line. It's infinitely adjustable and adaptable to any property anywhere.
Yeah, and that's where it's the key word in that, in your definition, is optimized. And so it's like, okay, what are you trying to optimize for? No, that's
the question right there, because that's important, because that's all goals and those are values, and that comes first. I'm not going to design a grazing property for vegans who want to eat, beans. That's just out of the question. So it's going to be a different system for them than it is for you, who's going to be watering livestock.
Yeah, and so again, I want to stress this, because this is probably one of the largest problems within permaculture, and I think are a lot of other domains as well, is this reliance on dogma or prescriptions or recipes, and other people just get stuck into following those things. But like I said before, when you take a prescription, there can be side effects. They can be nasty, and so at the end of the day, you and I are on the same page here, is the goal is to, teach people principles and hopefully some kind of a process that they can make their own recipe for themselves in a way that's optimized for their goals. It's adaptive, all those other things. And for for a lot of all the other things that permaculture got right, and it's based on biomimicry and natural ecosystems, there seems to have been that ability to have an adaptive system, in terms of adaptive compared to other people's properties, but also adaptive on the same property throughout time as the property changes. I guess, to be fair, I think Bill got that, but a lot of other people missed that, and it can't be stressed enough that don't just find a guru and mimic what they're doing, because it will not work.
Now, because that also relates. You mentioned on that side of thing, the not the prescription, but the pattern or the process.
Yeah,
it's similar in a different realm to like the difference between myth and fact. Myths may actually have truths within them, and these are truths to live by, and we can learn lessons from them, but they might not be factual.
Yes.
Now what we do is we take what we learned from these myths or these culture stories, and all world traditions, all cultures have their own culture stories that were the lessons on how to teach us how to live. Well, now that we're at this new place, let's take those lessons, but they get applied differently. We're not in the same situation that our ancestors were in. It's radically different. So let's use the truths that transcend time to live our lives today. That's what's a similar parallel going on between those.
Absolutely. It's like Wendell Berry has this great quote, facts are just information without context.
God love Wendell. All right.
Okay, so coming back to Water for Any Farm, the one thing that I want to kind of focus on a bit is, because I think this is probably one of the most valuable pieces from the Keyline system, that apart from Darren Doherty, I don't know a lot of other people that talk about it that much. I guess Richard Perkins, he hits on a lot, is the scale of permanence. And for me, it's like that was like the biggest thing that Yeoman did, but it's like most people don't even realize that that's what he created when they talk about him. And so I just thought we would have a bit of a discussion about why this idea of a scale of permanence, or the different variables that come into making a property design, why there's a hierarchy and why that hierarchy makes sense.
Boy, we've got another 5 hours to go. Well, just some of the things I'll touch on. It starts with like climate. Although in mass human beings are influencing the composition of the atmosphere, you or I individually, we can't change the climate of where we're at. It's doing this, it's done this for a long period of time. There's these instabilities thrown into it. We can expect this range of norms. We're not going to get something way over here, something way over there. You go to Phoenix, Arizona, you're not going to get it to succeed trying to plant a Brazilian tropical rainforest. Yeah. You want to mimic something that's been historically, contextually working there. So that's climate, and that's one of the things we have to adapt to it. Yeah. Then it goes through the various different other hierarchical systems that we have a little bit more control over, and we can start to change them. All of a sudden we have something that's totally plastics, totally malleable, and we can change it like that, and that's the soil. And it blows my mind that in the whole organic world, I've been a certified organic grower for 26 years. My parents were organic gardeners and farmers. It's all about soil. Even the whole regenerative craze that's going on now. Oh, carbon in the soil. Well, it's not all about carbon. It's, soil we can change almost overnight. Yeah. So let's get everything established first. And now let's tweak the soil, because we can do that for the rest of our lives. And if you don't believe me that soil is kind of irrelevant, this is a heresy now. I'm sounding like a hydroponics guy. In order to grow plants that are adapted to a particular site, let's say a cliff, where's the soil? Who dug the $40 hole for the $10 tree? Who did site preparation for 3 years with cover crops and manure and mulch on this cliff on the side of the road? Nobody. There's trees growing out of that cliff on the side of the road. Even soil scientists and in horticulture orchardists and stuff like that, if you read the literature over and over again, they all zero in into the fact that a tree can actually get about 80% of its nutrition from the environment as it is. It's like, wait a minute, the tree's alive. It's getting 100% of it. This tree growing out of a rock, it's getting 100% of what it needs out of that rock. Well, now we can go to that rock and spend the rest of our lives tweaking the soil in that crack, and that tree will go better, grow faster, have higher yields. Great, good for you, but it will grow there all by itself with sheer total utter neglect.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the spectrum of things that we can't change and things that we can change just like that. So that's why water was first on my first book for the minis within restoration agriculture, because it's the one that you're going to have to take a long-term view on this. We're changing the hydrology for a long time to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so like the kind of core principle behind that, like you mentioned, is the hierarchy of things that we have, the least amount of change, but that also affect us the most,
right,
down through these different factors where we have the most amount of change and they have the least amount of effect on us. And because, in coming back to this, you actually read this in your wrote this in your book, the Serenity Prayer, which is, give me the courage to accept the things I cannot change, the strength to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah,
it's like that's why we want to do that. Or there's another. I'm sure you've heard of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's like one of those is, what's the circle of influence versus the circle of concern? And because there's things that, they really affect you, like the weather. That's all farmers talk about is the weather, but we have no effect or very little effect over it. And so don't worry about it. We have to adapt to it, like you said. But but then instead, they talk all day long about the weather and the soil, and they kind of miss everything in between, which is where I think most of the benefit can come from. So I agree with you. Whenever I show that scale of permanence model at courses or conferences, I get a lot of flack from other PhD soil experts in the class that are just livid.
Yeah.
And I would put soil at the bottom, and it's
and let's go to the whole regenerative side on the soil scientist. It's all about increasing the soil organic matter, right? It's like, no, it's not. Let's put you on a river bottom, perhaps in Alberta, where there's been this organic matter deposited by floods for a zillion years. You got plenty of organic matter, but what's being deposited came from these mountains or hills over here, and there are some serious elements that are missing. And since you're in a floodplain, especially the leachable elements, calcium, sulfur, and so on, that they're gone, almost virtually gone. So to increase the organic matter is barely going to help you at all. Take like peat or muck soils. That's even more extreme. They're at site saturation for carbon. If you want to get real carbon capture now on that site, don't add more carbon to the soil, add more minerals to the soil. But this, once again, it's that narrow-minded thinking of this one true answer just addresses everything. Your site is different than a muck soil in central Michigan, which is different than where I was just at on a high plateau, a desert plateau in Colorado. Each one of them, we have a pattern that we follow, a hierarchy, and an order of operations, but the details of how we address their particular circumstances are custom designed. Michigan, Alberta, Colorado, custom designed, absolutely, totally unique for each site.
Absolutely. Well, and the other piece that I people often miss. So I was at an organic, I think it was Organic Alberta conference, and one of the presenters, he was talking about this, regenerative agricultural certification that they're trying to bring about now as the kind of new gold standard, and how it's all going to be all metric based as opposed to practice based, or outcome based as opposed to practice based, and things like that. And but I think I asked them, like, well, why don't we just start measuring, as opposed to measuring the soil and like focusing on that? It's like, what if we started measuring the nutrient density in the food?
Yeah, but not necessarily, because then what you could do with the nutrient density on the food, you grow hydroponic and you do all kinds of foliar applications, so the nutrients are in the food, not in the soil. I would like to go to more of what Will Harris is doing in White Oak Pastures, is overall ecosystem function.
Yeah.
Wherever you're located, what is an optimal ecosystem function? What does that ecosystem do in Alberta to, Manitoba to Florida? Then if we can go ahead and approach ecosystem optimization based on our eco region, overall ecosystem function is what I would want to have as a metric. And then I'd also flip it around. It's like the producer, no. The days of us paying for certification are over. It's time. If you want to sell fuzzy jackets for way too much money to people who want to wear purple when they're wandering around in the hillsides, cool. You pay for the certification that verifies that I'm doing this. And if you're the certification agency that's now a police Gestapo force that comes on and rifles through my records this thick every year, and it's somebody who's like 25, 26 years old who has no experience in agriculture at all, and is harassing me about my organic operation I've been doing for 26 years. If you want to be a policeman in my place, you pay for it. So if we have the products sales companies paying for the certification because they want to be certified this, and then the certifier themselves, maybe they're getting paid by the jacket manufacturer or whatever it is, the time for the farmer to pay for more stuff is over.
Totally. I agree. And I also agree with your the nutrient density isn't the whole piece. Absolutely. But the point I was trying to make there is I mentioned this nutrient density piece is like why are we measuring the thing that doesn't matter in terms of like how much carbon's in the soil and things like that. These seemingly like there's lead measures and there's lag measures, and everybody's focused on like soil carbon and stuff like that, but they're missing the bigger picture, like overall ecosystem function, the health of the water cycle, biodiversity and things like that. Right. But with the nutrient density piece, what I found was really interesting when I mentioned to this guy is he said, "Oh no, we can't do that. We can't measure the nutrient density of our food because it could start to put certain producers at a disadvantage because." I know, but I couldn't believe he said this because what if on your farm you have the best soil for growing carrots and you can grow amazingly delicious nutritious carrots, but on my farm I don't have good soils for growing carrots. That would put me at a disadvantage, and it blew my mind. It was like, then maybe you shouldn't be growing carrots. But it's just like it had never. No, we have to be able to grow corn and soybeans everywhere in the world, and that's it. It's just and plus I totally agree with all the other points about the insanity of the current certification and everything else is.
So let's go to a wild area somewhere. Most people know some sort of wild area that's almost quote unquote wilderness and stuff. You've got these natural plant community types that we human beings don't mess with.
Yes.
Walk through this section of wherever it is, whether it's grassland or wooded, etc., or even partially in between. You're walking along, it's like, oh, the vegetation's different here for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know why. So in nature, it custom designs itself. There are salt marshes where stuff really thrives. And so what is a really stupid idea long term, and it takes a lot of cost, energy, and effort and machinery, is to go ahead and dike it off, pump it out, drain the soils with a pump station to get all that salt water out of there, flush it with new irrigation water that comes in, and then you plant a corn that's not a crop that's not adapted to it. Why not grow what is adapted to that site? And then you have the best site for whatever it is. Yeah. Well, doggone it, you have the best stuff around. You have the best carrots around because that is the best carrot site.
Exactly.
I might have the best some other kind of site.
Yeah.
And we can do it all at scale because this is a continent. This is a large continent. We can do it at scale, and all of our markets are currently at scale. People don't buy food at a farmer's market. It's for social. It's a cultural event, and they'll buy onesie twosies here and there. The people who are buying food are wallowing through the Walmarts and Costco's of this world, just lobbing things in the basket. That's food. So those of us who want to actually produce food for humans, we now aggregate our product. It goes to some particular location, and then it gets distributed to where people are buying food. It's at scale. We can be custom designed based on what our piece of property will support and do the best,
Yeah.
and still have, access to all these markets.
Yeah.
We've got to change our thinking and how we roll it out on the ground.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really great summary of why, soil is, I don't know what Yeoman's logic for why soil was on the bottom, but in terms of why it's on the bottom for me, of that hierarchy, the scale of permanence is it's for all the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I'll throw out there is so we actually changed in the book that we just wrote, we changed the order, and we also changed kind of what elements were part of it, of the hierarchy. And I'm not going to go through that, but the name that we started calling it was the order of operations. And one of the reasons we like that name so much is I'm sure you remember back from high school algebra, the idea of PEDMIS or BEDMIS. There's an order of operations when you're doing algebra, and if you don't get the order right, if you don't go from parentheses, exponents, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction, if you don't go through it in that order, you'll get the wrong answer. And so when we talk about this order of operations, or the scale of permanence, going through from geography, climate, water access structures, fencing, flora, fauna, business, technology, and soil is our version of the hierarchy. If you don't go through it in that order, you can end up with the kind of wrong answer at the end of it.
I'd like to modify that, not change it at all.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful order on the design side. Once you hit the ground, there's a little bit different order of operations. Is that, then we'll do this first, then second, then third, then fourth.
Yes.
So this order of operations on the ground fits within your design hierarchy of how you got that laid out. And that's the only little modification that I would add to it.
So can you say that again? I misunderstood that.
Well, the design side, okay.
Yeah.
So our basic, Restoration Agriculture Development, restorationag.com is
Yep.
our design company that goes around and helps other farmers install systems like this.
Yeah.
We have it's 3 broad categories. Phase 1 is just an ecological assessment to go there and just check out the whole property on the ground as it actually is, not through computers and stuff like that, but what's actually going on.
Yeah.
At that phase, what you just described as your order of operations, that is where your order of operations comes into play on our design phase. Well, then we go through water management, tree planting, and then it becomes on the ground technical management and assistance through time. But what your hierarchy at the design and planning phase, that is
absolutely. And so like that hierarchy for our process, it fits in within. There's 5 stages, and the first is goal setting, and then diagnosis, design, implementation, and then long-term monitoring. So absolutely, I totally agree. When you get in that,
so let's go to that, because I like that your 5-stage. Well, we have a little simplified 4-stage, and I came up with the acronym while I was trying to ingratiate myself before the Pennsylvania whatever the certification is, because I wanted to get invited to their conference. But it was PASA. And plan, act, seek feedback, adjust. Plan, act, seek feedback, and adjust over and over. So it's the same thing as your 5-step.
Yeah.
Just with 4 letters instead of 5.
Totally. Well, it was funny. Like after, or I guess it was while we were writing the book, and we'd been using the process for a while. I can't remember how I found it, but there's are you familiar with the Sigma 6 manufacturing process?
I'm not actually.
So I don't know much about it either, but somebody sent it to me, or I was looking something up for processes or something, and it's almost identical. There's like a 6-stage process, and it starts with this, and it's broad setting is like have a goal, create some kind of a look at what you already have, design something new, build it, but then there's a monitor it, and then feedback, and just go through it again. And so and then I started looking at all these other processes, and I thought we'd done this amazing new original thing. It's like 20 other guys that had done the same thing.
And it's actually, that's a summary, because I had done the holistic management training way back before they split in the various different ways they split and all that. And I grew up in a family of alcoholic, drunk alcoholic born again Amway salesman people. And so if you can imagine a evangelistic Amway salesperson is, oh, I got to tell you about this new business, and you're always being hammered by these people. You got to come to the next meeting. So I did the holistic management training. It's like, oh, you got to come to the next meeting, make it to the next level. And I was like, I just got really wigged out because I didn't want to either go to the AA meetings or the Amway meetings. And so just like, look, what is the essence of what the whole holistic management framework is? It's plan, act, seek, feedback, and adjust. Yeah. Or you've got it in 5 steps. Somebody else has it in 6 steps. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Same pattern, different details.
Exactly. Totally. So I'd like to shift now and talk a bit more about your property, because I think you have, to my knowledge, one of the largest and oldest permaculture properties in North America, if I'm not mistaken. I know there's smaller, older ones, but one of the things you mentioned in Water for Any Farm is that as a result of all the water harvesting and work you've done on your property, you now have 4 springs that run for, like you said, it was, from late winter till, midsummer.
Right.
And like, what are some of the other changes that you've seen on your farm that you didn't expect, but that blow you away?
What I didn't expect, I expected, because we're imitating here on the majority of the farm, we're imitating the oak savanna plant community type, which is Fagaceae, oak chestnut or beech, cherries, apples, hazelnut, plums, grapes, currants, gooseberries, vines, the shade tolerance of fungi and animals all around. So that's the target ecosystem that we are going toward. And we planted high density at first because I knew that there were going to be plants that just weren't adapted to here. I've used mostly seedlings because I'm after population fitness over individual performance. Instead of finding this one apple tree that produces 85 million pounds of apples per tree, I want to have a population that survives pest, disease, ice storm, wind, fire, trample animals, all that kind of stuff. I want that population to be fit in this area. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that removing material would be a significant part of the operation. And so I knew that I would, become a woodcutter. I was going to end up cutting lots of trees. And so I would cut trees, inoculate with mushrooms, and decay that, chip tops and stuff like that, or have livestock eat the leaves, then chip the tops, inoculate with mushroom spawn on the chips. So I knew that I was going to be doing this through time, but the quantity and the volume of material that I'm cutting and removing is almost getting to the point where it's unmanageable for one guy to take care of slinging chainsaw. Wow. So I didn't realize that I would turn from a cucumber farmer to a chainsaw slinger this fast. And wow. Currently right now, I'm guessing that I could be producing 2 to 3 tons of oyster mushroom alone every single year forever.
Wow. And so, and how long did that transformation take place then?
It was about 10 years. Once I was 10 years in, I had hybrid poplar of a certain size. All of the framing in this building that you see right here is all material that I planted.
Wow.
The siding, these are off of pines. Notice they're small. They're not fat, right?
Yeah.
Well, you plant these things thicker than flies on a roadkill. And then as they get too close to each other, you start to take out the lousy ones and leave the best ones behind. They'll grow better. And my big criteria was make sure that the grass was still growing underneath, because I want that grass forage to be dense as can be so you don't see any dirt underneath. And so by removing all the hybrid poplars, they sprouted back. If you got 10 sprouts, and if they grow to a foot in diameter in 10 years, you can take a tree out every single year. So after out of like the tens of thousands of hybrid poplars that are out here, I'd say, maybe not even 5,000, but just use that. It's a huge number for me to keep up with. I can't keep up with it.
Yeah, totally.
It's great. I love it.
That's crazy. We, I don't know, about 30 years ago, my parents planted like one of their first shelter belt trees of hybrid poplar. And now, fast forward for the last couple of years, we've heated like 2 homes with just like the trimmings right. off of that one row of trees. it truly is mind blowing, the abundance that you can get.
And if I have an acre of ground, this is what another thing. All right, so here's another thing. In my system, because there literally are, not all of nature is all cooperative. Everything's cooperative. No, it doesn't. There are competitive effects in nature, and there are cooperative effects in nature. It's not either or. Well, once you start to get competitive effects, you take out to release a different crop, whatever that might be, the grass, or how, as I just described with the hybrid poplars. But because there are competitive effects, and they are trying to get the same sunlight, the same, or all that kind of stuff, I will get lower yields of each individual thing. I have some of the lowest yields of hazelnuts of anybody in our grower group. Well, that sucks, doesn't it? Now, would anybody go to a workshop that says, oh yeah, I'll show you how to get lower yields? You don't do it, because it's like, forget that. Well, yeah, but wait, I get lower yields of hazelnuts, and as a byproduct, I get oyster mushrooms, I get beef, I get sunflowers, on and on and on. You just add up all these different things. And in restoration agriculture, the last color plate in the central section is a picture of my son a long time ago, with an acre of, he's in an acre of chestnuts, acre of sunflower, acre of green peppers, and an acre of acorn squash, all planted on the same acre. And I got half the yield of chestnuts, half the yield of sunflowers, half the yield of peppers, half the yield of acorn squash. You got 2 total yields. Agroforesters call that the land equivalent ratio, that you may get less of this and less of that, but combined, it's a greater total yield. Yeah. And we don't know the total yield that we can get. And what ends up being the limiting factor for me, I already mentioned it, like with too many trees to cut, there's only so many things that a human being can wrap their brain around and actually take care of, because it has to pay itself. It may not pay my whole salary when I'm out there trimming to release this tree to grow better and making mushrooms out of. That may not be paying my hourly wage, but that combined with the beef, combined with the wood, combined with the on and on and on, actually ends up at the end of the year to be enough. Yeah. And what do we really need? We really need enough. Let's take care of the economy, because the dollar economy wants dollars. Give it to it. Well, now let's live a good life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people just don't believe that that's possible. Yeah. And that, I think, is the biggest limiting factor of all, is just people say that can't be true.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is one of the most pervasive kind of myths in farming. In reading your books, I'm glad that you despise it as much as I do. Is that there's this, like, if it doesn't suck, you're not doing it right. There's this, like, or I've made this joke before on the podcast, but if there was an Olympics of martyrdom and farmers competed, they would lose on purpose. And I don't get it. Like, why don't you want to have a more enjoyable life and less work? And so it's like, yeah, it might, with these perennial systems, it might be 3 years of just madness to manage these things. But once they're up and going, I mean, this is the kind of holy grail of permaculture. But you have proof of concept of this now on your farm. Is that eventually the workload? I mean, like, you're still doing work, but from on my own property, it doesn't feel like work. Like, it's totally different versus when I grew up. I worked on the farm and it sucked.
It's seasonal, and it's limited because it is seasonal. You're taking care of these here and these here and these here and these here, and because I'm almost always getting some sort of yield out of it. It's not like I got to get all the corn in or all the hay before the rain, whatever it is. It's like I'm doing a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Now, count to 100,000. I know how to do that, but that's a long way and that's big. But I can count to 10 over and over and over and over and over again. So I'll count to 10, 100 times instead of count to 100,000. It's just too much work.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of doing it. And again, having that diversity, it's like when one job starts to suck, you just go do something else. And then, or if it's raining one day and you can't be doing the one, if maybe you can't get into the fields to till, but you'll go do something else. It's that they're having that diversity on farms is absolutely essential for the profitability as well as just peace of mind and quality of life. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on with you is I was blown away by this. I never really thought about it because when I designed our farm out, I had access to LiDAR topographical maps. They cost me like $1,500, and I had a $2,000 laser level, and I still it was tough for me. But in your book Water for Any Farm, you describe how you designed your whole farm with or I don't know if you used an A-frame. Did you use an A-frame right off the bat?
A-frame from the first thing was an A-frame with a bolt on a string.
Yeah, like that just blows me away. Is that like how like this doesn't have to be, anybody can do this. It was what I got.
It's on any farm. It's adaptable to any farm. And one of the things that I really would like to encourage people, I know both you and I, some of our economic livelihood comes from helping others, and that involves site maps.
Yeah.
Don't get hung up on the doggone site map. It's like soil. It's not that important. What's more important than the pretty picture is actually designing things on your ground, because there are variations in the landscape that LiDAR can't see.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a human mind and an ability to adapt to the situation as it actually is on the ground, you're just taking a picture and imposing it on reality. It's not going to work. So, we will do like conceptuals at first, then we go put it in on the ground. Once it's installed, then you do an as-built. That's the proofed one, the ground proofed one. So if you're going to get hung up and the map's going to be right, maps, do it after you put the system in place on the ground, because then it gives you information that teaches you something. So oh, now I know why it's always too wet over here. Now I know why it's too dry over here.
I'm always blown away at how most permaculture properties, their original design looks better than the real thing. Like it's this beautiful watercolored, multi-$1,000 project, and then their real site looks like a junkyard. And
if you go to New Forest Farm, you look up images of New Forest Farm. It's all over the internet, right?
Yeah.
That pattern right there, and then the drawings, the site map that we actually drew was done by myself, 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, with crayons and pencils on like paper towels.
Totally.
That's the design.
Yeah.
What's more important is the reality on the ground first. That's the ecologically important thing. And if you imitate your natural plant community types of where you are, your possibility of failure drops down to almost zero, because this stuff is growing in the ditch on the side of the road. It does just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you just mentioned there that I wanted to go into a bit, if you're comfortable with it, is a lot of, I'm sure you've heard the saying is the only way to make a living in permaculture is to teach. It seems like that's the case in regenerative agriculture or any kind of farming stuff. It seems like all the quote unquote big names are all involved in consulting or public speaking or teaching classes and stuff like that. And so I personally know dozens of farmers who are making a very good living doing nothing other than farming. But I just wanted to get your kind of thoughts on that, because basically that's one of the kind of wrenches that a lot of people try to throw in my spokes when I'm talking about what we've done, is like, yeah, but does it make any money?
Well, that's the biggest thing for me too, is people say, oh yeah, but Mark Sheppard doesn't have an economic model, because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear the fact that I said, okay, start before you ever buy this land with this pattern of how whatever money comes into your system, you put 10% in a charitable contributions fund, you put 10% into a tax payment and reinvestment fund, and you live on 80% of your net income starting today. They don't like that. Well, then once you get enough accumulated in your investment fund, then you use that as a down payment on a piece of property, and you borrow money. Oh, horrors. and you design a system that allows you to pay back your debt service. That's called leverage. And then you do the work on the ground as a farmer, and you may not make a lot of money, but all you have to do is make a +1 at the end of the year. That's called profitable. If you're paying your bills, making a +1 at the end of the year, the byproduct is extraordinarily good health and nutrition, because you're getting good exercise, outdoors, fresh water, and the best produce in the world because you're producing it. And then you're producing all of your own heat, all of your own electricity. Just take food, for example. If see this line behind my head here, if that's zero line, most people, to them, food is an expense. All I have to do is get you up here where you're just a little bit of a surplus. If I've replaced all that, your gain is huge. You know, if you're trying to do this and make all kinds of dollars, I want to make $50 million and all that kind of stuff, yet still have all these expense holes in it, that's ridiculous. So by making a modest, honest livelihood and eliminating these expenses, right over here, you can't hear the hum right now, thank goodness, is all of the electronics for running the wind turbine. You know, I've been producing whatever. This site, when you buy a degraded site, nobody wants it. It's a piece of junk land. It's the same thing below zero. It's below economic value. And then by farming it and getting lower than normal yields, you make a +1 on it. That gain, people like to buy a piece of property like this and they want to make that gain. You can't, because it's already a good property. It's already a beautiful property, whatever. I can take a piece of crap property, and the big gain for me is the long-term asset value of the property. This property first cost $40,000 7 years ago. The last appraisal came through of $560,000. Do the math on that, MF, and have the agriculture itself is paying for the work to turn that asset from this to this. That was the real gain over time. And people don't like to hear that. Well, then marketing your product. Oh, join with others. Now we have to talk to each other. We have to make decisions in common. And if your team makes the majority decision and I have to abide by it, people tend to walk. Well, no, if we're all in this together, I have to swallow my pride. I'm not the smartest tool in the box. I'm not the most brilliant. I don't have the best tech. And you guys say that that's the direction you want to go. I think it's a foolish decision, but we're all in this together. I'm with you. So they don't like the fact that you have to actually be frugal with your finances. They don't like the fact that you actually have to be prudent and save money. They don't like the fact that I say, go ahead and borrow money. It's okay. And then they don't like the fact that you have to do what nature says instead of what you want. And then they don't like the fact that you have to get along with others. Tell me there's no economic model in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is mind blowing. And yeah, the fact that it takes, decades or in some cases decades to pay off some of that debt before you are my family and I, we don't have any more debt. And we've just seen a massive change in the quality of our life in terms of, but we never it was never kind of part of our conscious plan or whatever. But now that it's there, it's like this land is paid for, and it's going to be stay in our family for as long as possible. It's I can't imagine the leg up that this is going to give future generations. And so it's thinking on it on too short of a time scale is another big problem. It's yeah, we might have to work a little bit harder in this life, but for sure you can reach it in one lifetime. My parents did, and they did it with 6 kids, and they didn't know what the hell they were doing in the early years. It wasn't internet or anything else, but we did it, and that was during they were paying 15% interest some of the years in the early years when they bought the farm. So it absolutely is. It is possible. And so before we close out here, Mark, I would love to hear about some of the other projects that you've got you're working on right now. I know you do a ton of restoration work all around the world. Could you just take a few minutes to talk about some of the really exciting projects that you've got either in the works or that you've just finished up that you're starting to see good results on?
Well, most of the projects I'm seeing good results. Now, you also think if my and the company Restoration Agriculture Development, the overall target is a rehabilitated ecosystem mimic that produces food, fuels, medicines, fibers, and it pays its own way.
Yeah.
And it's a complex model. Well, now any individual, when they see this whole complexity, our job is to represent this ecological whole. Well, then they can pick and choose what parts of it they want to pick and choose. And then probably the people who have the most problems are the ones that got into the prescription basis. And, they think that this is a prescription,
Yeah.
and it's the one true answer. So, those aside, everybody's got, a really great handle on parts of this ecosystem whole. Working in Africa, East Africa, Tanzania, I think it's mainsprings.org or mainspring.org, working with orphanages and schools. Within 4 years, they're food self-reliant. When this whole COVID thing, I just left, I taught a course at that particular, the first campus we did. When COVID came, they just shut the gates and they were fine. Pretty cool, huh? And that's really cool.
Wow.
And so that, that's some of the stuff doing around the world. Well, then for individuals and, investors in the US and Canada, working every place from Colorado, there's a high mountain plateau, which is really amazing, that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they dug a irrigation ditch from a river to the top of this plateau, to the top edge of the plateau, 15 miles with hand tools and horses.
Wow.
And it took them like 6, 7, 8 years to dig this ditch. Well, then this irrigation ditch goes across. The irrigation management is run by a cooperative that every landowner on this plateau has to be a member of this cooperative. And then everybody gets an allotment. Here's this much water. And so when they turn on the ditch in the springtime, here it comes. And you've got water coming through there every single day for 100 years. Know what the biggest problem is on that plateau? 3 inches of rain, only this much rain in the course of a year. So it was a desert. It was a complete desert. Know what the biggest problem is right now?
Water erosion?
Swamps. Because this water soaked in on the head ditch alone has been 100 years of sub-irrigating this whole plateau, and it hits an obstruction. Now it starts to come out. They've got springs all over the place. And you ready for this? You know what one of the strategies is in dealing with this? And we've got some folks that are starting on that process there. Fish.
Wow.
Fish. You have so much water. They have the equivalent of 45 inches of rain a year. They can't use it fast enough.
Wow.
It's a beautiful temperate climate, similar climate as Oklahoma, not Oklahoma, but Missouri, but no rain. It's all sub-irrigated for 100 years. That's one site. And then working in upstate New York with Cranmore Advisors, I think it's Cranmoor, or 2 N's maybe in there, Cranmore Advisors. They are purchasing properties in an area and doing a conversion to perennial woody crops and livestock as an investment, legit investment for, investment funds and individuals and stuff like that. And the goal there is to get a concentration of the various different woody crops that are appropriate for that region. So now what that does is you have enough product to drive the processing, to drive the value added, and all of that along the way. Each one of those is an investment, has great investment potential. And if you think about a perennial crop, I'll compare it to what happened in New York State. This is part of it. Chobani yogurt kind of kept the dairy industry alive. It gave it a new shot of oomph, and sales just skyrocketed. They went, almost international. And so that was basically what this particular region in New York was, all dairy farms supplying Chobani. Well, pretty soon the state of California gave Chobani, the company, a really sweet deal. Plus they can get milk out of mega CAFOs at a lower price. Chobani's business model makes more sense in California. They right away, instantly, quick decision, cut the knees off of everybody, and they bailed and they went to California. So there's this huge collapse in the value of agricultural land and incredible economic hardship. If we plant perennial ecosystems that are adapted to that place, good luck moving that perennial ecosystem to California, because it doesn't belong in California. It belongs in New York State. So the goal is to create an economy that is now based on the actual ecology of the actual place and is actually adapted with the genetics and everything like that, and hits the mass market of, what's that little town down the end of the Hudson River? New York something. Yeah, New York, New York. There's a massive markets to feed with a perennial ecology. And so this is actual true ecological rural economic development that they're working on. So, and then everything in between.
Yeah.
The homesteader, the the quote unquote orchardist, and the hobby farmer, all of that.
That's insane. So if you had to guess, and maybe you know the number,
A lot of fun.
how many acres do you think are under your influence right now? Whether kind of, you know, directly involved in your projects, or people who have contacted you and said, you know, Mark, I've read your books, I've watched all your YouTube videos, and I've done, it's working on my farm. How many acres do you think worldwide you'd have?
I don't really know. You know, we've tried a couple different times to add it all up, but we're too busy that we don't have time to sit there and, you know, add our things up.
Pat your own backs.
Yeah, you know, but personally, you know, my own self, I'm personally managing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 properties in 3 different states. Right here, me, myself, and I. It's easy.
Wow.
It's permaculture. It's a perennial ecosystem. All I got to do is go in and harvest every once in a while. And by harvesting, I'm steering the system where I want it to go. And then there was at least one project that I did. It was a larger grazing operation, about 10,000 acres. And so I did hundreds of sites with, you know, I don't know if and that's what we were trying to look is, did we hit 1 million yet? I don't know. And actually, let's cut it off real quick, because I've been drinking water for an hour and a half. What happened to that?
That's a good place to end it. We started with water, and it's going to end with water.
That's right. Right on through.
Yeah.
Look at the pattern once again.
Yeah.
You know, it goes in, all your kidneys, your liver, all these dendritic patterns. Let's capture this resource, bring it through, then distribute it again, and distribute it free.
Yeah. And if I know you, it's not going to go into some lake or river system or a chemical treatment plant. It's going to go and make more trees. And
all right. So thanks for your time, Takota. I really appreciate this. This is great.
Thank you for taking the time, Mark.